members of Gen Z. These are people as young as teenagers and can be as old as somewhere in their mid to late 20s. They have telephobia, dealing with phone anxiety. With us is David Olcott. Olcott is a workplace expert and the CEO of Summarize Success, an international executive, organizational, and personal coaching firm. What's wrong with these Gen Zers, David? Too much screen time or what?
Dan, first of all, thanks for having me back on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Welcome back.
You've probably heard the adage that practice makes perfect. Well, in our experience,
I think it makes better.
Well, in our experience, it actually is practice makes permanent. So when you practice certain things over and over again, whether you're good at them or bad at them, they just make it permanent. They're not perfect, right? Yeah. So the idea here is that if I'm practicing texting and emails all the time, and I'm not practicing face-to-face communication with other people on the phone or receiving phone calls, I'm actually going to have this thing where when you don't practice something, it actually affects my confidence, and fear rushes in to fill that gap.
You know, it's that makes all the sense in the world, but it's kind of sad. You know, I have two kids who are not Gen Zers. They're a little older. They're in their 30s, and they're always trying to make me text, and it takes me longer to text than it does to have a quick phone conversation.
I'm with you.
You know, and when we were, I'm a little probably older than you because I think I'm older than everybody. When we were kids, the telephone was what became one of our early toys. We would do telephone pranks. We would call some of the older people on the street and say we were from the electric company and ask them if their refrigerator was running, and they'd say, "Oh yes, it is running. Well, why don't you catch it?" You know, I mean, there were lessons. There were ways to reach the outside world that were. You know, of course, these kids are way out of the. So how are we going to make them the phone booth on the street corner is gone, so they have no idea what that is or ever was.
Right.
You know, the idea of Superman jumping into a phone booth and changing, we all knew what that was. What's going to happen 20, 30 years from now when Gen Z is running the world?
It's a great question. You know, going back to like the 1960s, which I grew up through, and sounds like you did too. Remember, we had this huge rebellious phase going on where people were protesting our streets in the Vietnam War and everything else. And remember, those people grew up to be the bosses of the country. So we've got a real chance for our generations to be able to move through this phase and do this next thing about stepping up in this level of responsibility. So that's what I'm hopeful for. The thing that's going to change some of that we're not clear about is how technology is going to affect that.
Well, now we're talking about the day of AI coming at us, and all of those changes and the robotic changes, which would take us down a rabbit hole which is too deep. But is it conceivable for Generation Z never to get comfortable with a telephone? I mean, cell phones, smartphones. They're comfortable with those phones, I assume. No?
They are. As a matter of fact, it's interesting because, you know, I was talking to the gentleman the other day, and he was talking about how gifted he was being able to work with AI. And I kind of sat him down for a minute. I was like, well, okay, tell me more about that. He says, well, this, and I do this, and I do this. And I said, so you're having to ask questions to that AI to make it work. So he is the prompter of that, which was really interesting because AI doesn't prompt itself yet. When we get into quantum computers, that's a real possibility. But this human technology that you and I are talking about, Dan, is this ability to ask quality questions. And that's such an important part of understanding human technology, because when we ask great questions, we get great answers, great responses. We do the same thing with machine world, and we can't ask great questions. We're not going to get the answers we're after.
One of the things that's great about the telephone, and obviously with the smartphone and cell phones and satellite, all of that, I can, I'm old enough to remember you had dial phones, okay? And now I find myself last summer with about 15 tourists. We're in Naples Airport, and we have a problem. There was a communication problem, and there was a problem with some of the tickets, the airline tickets that we had, and we were trying to get back to the U.S. So I'm able to, on a Sunday morning with my cell phone, call the head of the travel company, who's half a world away in the United States. Now, that never would have happened if this had occurred 30 years ago or 40 years ago. We would have been stuck at that airport. Maybe we never would have gotten out of the airport. I don't know. Maybe we would have talked our way out of it some way. But just the facility to be able to have a telephone which can get you back to somebody who then can call somebody and solve a problem. What is the Gen Zers going to do? They're going to sit there and they're going to try to send a text to someone which might or might not get through. I'm a little worried here about Gen Z. I know that telephones have been around longer, and they probably look at the telephones as old-fashioned and something their parents and grandparents used, but there's new incarnations of the telephone. I just don't get it. They are using the telephone, but they're not using it to speak directly to another person. They're using it almost as I dare say it, almost like the people who were sending Morse codes. Morse code 150 years ago, telegraphs. They're sending text messages. Why would they not be comfortable with the verbal interaction is what I'm asking. And I'm wondering if you can shed any light on that for me.
Sure. As a matter of fact, when you think about Gen Zs and this other generation, I will tell you, they absolutely turn circles around me when it comes to technology. They're so smart, Dan, about this stuff. The missing component is something you and I grew up with, which is how do you interact with people once you want to get something done? And that's, as long as there's humans, we're going to have to do that. So two parts of communication, right? One is the content, and Gen Zs have that stuff down because they can text information, Google stuff like crazy, just, circles around me all day long. It's the presentation skills that they're really lacking. And those presentation skills is what we actually bring to the table. And there's plenty of programs out there and workplace environments where you can get that information.
Okay, tell me about your group, Summarize Success. Who can it help, and how do people get in touch with you?
So the best way to reach us is at samuraisuccess.com. But we really are an executive coaching firm that really focuses on small and medium-sized businesses, people who really want to understand the mastery of business, not just the money side, because the truth is money is usually pretty easy for most of our clients. It's keeping the money and then structuring that for longevity and something we call Project Destiny, having enough time and money to do what you really want to do in this lifetime.
Sounds great. David Olcott, appreciate it very much. SamuraiSuccess.com. Sounds
Thanks,
great. Hopefully some folks will reach out either by telephone or by text. Either way.
We'll be prepared.
Thanks, David. David Olcott.
Thanks,
Appreciate it very
All right,
much.
bye.
Talk to you soon.